Hello, my name is Joseph Tremblay, and I wanted to present to you my final project for education psychology. To begin, I wanted to cover my lesson profile, then I'll cover my thesis statement, experiences within my observations, my assessment of those observations, and then my final conclusions. So, in my lesson profile, I wanted to give an introduction to Fairfield Prep, where I teach now and where I have taught for the last 3 years. So my introduction to Fairfield Prep, and I chose my observations at Fairfield Prep not only because I work there, but I feel like a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think that the school is a diverse school. It actually has a larger diverse population than we're given credit for. We have over 10% of our student population being African American students, and actually we have more African American students in our school than other schools in Fairfield, the city. So Fairfield Prep also, on top of that, gives financial assistance to 31% of our students. So all of these students are actually incorporated under our Seed Diversity program. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be an African American student to be in the Seed program, but you could be under a multitude of different diverse populations that we would give financial assistance to. So this program is separate from our core programs of the school, and it's basically there to offer extra guidance for the students that would be in or considered in a diverse background. Also, these students have peer mentors that are from the university, Fairfield U, which come in and assist these students with their progress and where they're going in the school. So what am I going to discuss in my thesis and in my presentation? I'm going to discuss, obviously, how my observation contributed to my thesis, and I will prove from these observations and through our readings how this thesis should be considered a valuable resource for any teacher wondering how they should approach a learning environment with a diverse population in a Catholic school. But in the end, I really believe that my thesis can be applied to any school out there. So I observed another Spanish teacher in my department for my observations, and I just wanted to give you an idea of the classroom setup. They were in rows, and they were all facing towards a projector. So what led me to my thesis? Obviously, prep has been a really important part of my life for the last 3 years, and I've wanted to improve prep, and I kind of thought of 3 ways that I could do that. I wanted to uncover problems with our culture because I've heard these problems, I've seen these problems in my classroom and through my observations, and I want to see how I can make that better. I wanted to also improve the quality of education for students of diverse backgrounds. I come from one of these backgrounds being financially in trouble when I was in high school, so I always have it under my radar for students that are in these situations. So, and third, I wanted to become a better teacher by learning and growing from what I've seen at prep, and obviously through these observations and this presentation. So that brings me to my thesis statement. My thesis statement is as follows. Underprivileged students involved in tuition benefit programs at Catholic private schools can be more effectively taught by maintaining a classroom environment of high expectations and challenge, which extends to these students, obviously. And most importantly, having a culturally responsive teacher. So this brings me to my essential understandings. And these are divided in 3 different sections. These are what I believe is necessary to have in a classroom to effectively teach students of diverse backgrounds in a Catholic private school. So, number 1 is high expectations. High expectations should be kept for all students in a classroom, no matter what the student. no matter where the student comes from, no matter who it is. You cannot judge or should not judge that student based off of where they come from. You have to challenge that student. I believe that any student can do anything. So you need to have those high expectations and that challenge combined to be able to make that student see where he can go. And I say he because our school is all boys. So it's not just an academically challenged environment, but they should also be challenged, and everyone in that class should be challenged to know their culture and other cultures in the room. And then finally, which I'm really going to be touching upon more extensively in this presentation, is that a teacher needs to be culturally responsive to students in the room in order to make sure the student is aware and understanding and culturally sensitive. So this brings me to a couple different anecdotes that I wanted to discuss in my observations or from my observations. So in my observation, students from the SEED program in the class that I was observing tend to be less likely to speak out and raise their hands. And this is something that I personally have dealt with in my own class, and I kind of started realizing this as I was doing my observations. And by the way, I can say that these students are in the SEED program because I've actually taught them previous years, so I know a little bit about them, and I knew that they were in the SEED program. So the teacher, making sure to involve each student, did call in almost everyone in the class that I was observing, though. So I did see that. So as a story to tell about one of my observations, and I'll represent the student as student 1, was while in class, student 1 was frustrated with a problem given by the teacher, and this student is involved in the SEED program at Prep. He's someone that I knew, and he's also an African-American student. You could see that the student was visibly frustrated, and he started to get angry. The teacher asked the student to answer the question, and the student gave up immediately and would not give any answer or try to answer the question. And thinking back, this is definitely something that I have had a problem with in the past. So I wanted to give the teacher response and then the teacher required response based off of my thesis. So at first, the teacher stated that the student must try his best. Second, the teacher spoke to the student individually and said that she has the same expectations for him as the rest of the class. And then third, the teacher left the student to work on his own. So per my thesis, the teacher required response would be as follows. So first, the teacher should be culturally responsive and think of the student's needs. So maybe the student was nervous to be incorrect and then have the class laugh at him based off of him being part of that minority, and he didn't want to raise awareness or attention to himself. So he didn't even give it that try. And the teacher should be culturally responsible enough to be able to maybe make that assumption. And then second, the teacher should approach the student and state the expectations. Obviously, it's important that the student does try his best and make an environment where that student feels comfortable enough to be able to answer. Give help and advice when it's needed, and state that he is meant to review the material and you will hold him to that. So third, obviously maintain order with other students. Do not allow students to make fun of that student number 1 for not understanding or knowing what's going on, because maybe he did. And then come back to the student to assess the situation. And honestly, in the end, this is a perfect opportunity where this teacher could address the class and say every single person has a right to be able to speak and not be laughed at, per se. So this reminded me of Successful Intelligence. And honestly, one of the quotes that just stuck with me from this class was that housewives who could successfully do the mathematical needs for comparison shopping in supermarkets, they were unable to do the same mathematics when they were placed in a classroom and given asthmorphoric problems presented in an abstract form. And I didn't mean to compare these students to housewives, but the idea I wanted to compare from these housewives to students that might be involved in the SEED program. But these students, in a way, can be compared to the quote, no matter where you come from, you can do the work no matter who you are, where you're from. And you cannot judge that student from where they come from. You cannot assume that that student actually doesn't know the material. Instead, you should think of that and you should create an environment where he actually does feel comfortable. So before just thinking that they can't do something or resorting to that, oh, you just don't know, I'm going to move on. If you put it a different way, or you understand you need to change the way that you teach in order to teach them better, you will. So that was something that stuck with me for intelligence. So through my research and findings, there was another thing in the lesson that stuck out to me, or the second lesson that stuck out to me. And this lesson was in the basis of giving a student a topic that was culturally relevant and having the student shoot a video in association with the topic. So in one particular group that I observed, the student shot a video as a police officer pulling over a group of students who had drugs in their possession. They had an African American student in their group. And the one thing that caught me was in their group, the African American student was portrayed as the one running from the police. So I wanted to give the teacher a response, and the teacher responded by addressing the whole video and wondering how this is addressed, or how this video addressed the topic that she gave, not just showing what happens on a day-to-day basis in our society. She stated that the students could have raised more awareness by giving testimony and showing more about the actual problem. So instead of just showing a black student running from the police, was not addressing a topic of the day in the proper way. What she wanted was the students to give testimony, speak about it, create a discussion within the group, not something that people would laugh at because it might be something that they see on the 6 o'clock news and take as normal. She wanted this to be more of a discussion rather than funny video. So the recommended response was actually what the teacher did. The teacher responded to the student in a very culturally responsive tone. It is not known how the project was administered or assigned before. So it's difficult to speak on how it was formed, but in the end she responded appropriately. For the future, according to my theory, she should keep speaking with the students and understanding his culture to raise this awareness and welcome discussion in this classroom. Where I think that she could have expanded was to create a learning moment for those students and be able to speak more about this rather than state that the expectations weren't met. We should have made a discussion out of this and end it there. I think that she could have done a little bit more by talking about the actual topic and why did they stop at just the black kid running from the police. Why didn't they talk about why he was or why this is portrayed in the news? So more parts of my research involved in this. The teacher had the proper idea going into the lesson and had the correct pedagogical practices to be able to create this lesson. And the teacher was able to show planning and communication skills. She motivated her students and had proper classroom management. The choice of topic really was able to show that she was sensitive to the needs of having common everyday problems being brought in the classroom and discussed. And she was definitely able to show that she had a general pedagogical knowledge in the circumstance, which led to her teaching, getting to all students involved in the classroom. So more of like a general assessment of all of my observations. Overall, it seems that Students in the SEED program spoke less overall in the classroom, but their grades were more in line with the rest of the classroom. And overall in Fairfield Prep, the grades of these students are below average, but it wasn't shown in this classroom, and that raised some questions for me. When given the chance to be open and have a culturally responsive teacher who is tough and has high standards, they seem to thrive in that class. And the question that I was speaking about is, why isn't this happening in other classrooms? Why are they successful in some classes and not others? And I honestly believe that it has to do with a teacher being culturally responsive. So this led me to getting deeper into what you really need to have in this classroom. And the assessment commentary deficit or difference really stuck with me. And in this article we read this semester, they stated 4 different ways we can avoid creating a deficit for our students coming from diverse households, and they're as follows. You should avoid assumptions. You should design assessments from within the culture being studied rather than transplanting assessments from other groups. And I think this second one is very important. You cannot have an assessment that you just take from one culture and then put it in another room. You need to assess the culture of every single student in that room and combine all of that to be able to make a whole. You should also avoid overly simple causal models given the complex clusters of factors involved, especially at prep. I think teachers would easily go towards an assignment or an assessment that is for one culture only. But when you have a diverse population in that class, even if you don't know it, you're leaving some people out. So also, you need to consider carefully the impact of labels, expectations, and stereotype threat. And I think that I touch on that in the second observation, was that some of these students are being stereotyped as, oh, the black guy running from police, and that's not right. We need to be able to consider that, and we need to be able to show a sensitivity to that, and that will rub off on our students. Another interesting thing that I saw that easily could be applied to my high school and was said in preschool bias was that preschool, and it's very intense for me, is that preschool teachers spend more time on white students than their black counterparts. This could be said for other schools as well. I mean, I think it could totally be said for our school. Unfortunately, from my personal experience and knowledge from my students that have been involved in the SEED program or outside of the SEED program, especially, I think that it happens in high school as well. If in this classroom it shows that the students perform at the same degree as others from the classroom I observed, where the teacher is not only paying attention to them and expecting the worst, moreover, understanding where they have come from and applying that to their classroom with the same high expectations and rigor, they can perform at the same levels of their peers. So there's no reason and need to judge them differently. If you understand where they come from, then you'll easily be able to apply this theory. Unfortunately, it's not always the case, and you see some students excel in some classes and not in others, not because they're not intelligent, but there is a bias against them, and we need to start to cure that. So finally, my final conclusion is that in the end, I believe that there's a big hurdle that we need to get over in our school, and it's not only to be able to teach these students properly, but to change the culture to make them more comfortable in this environment where they are the minority. And inevitably, if you change the environment, then they're going to learn better. So from my observations, I think it's clear that although this may seem simple, if you create an environment in your classroom that is kept to high standards, and you also take time to understand where your students come from and know how to create valuable lessons and class assignments that touch upon everyday issues, you will be able to give that child an opportunity to work up to the same potential as other students in the room. And although it is a good conclusion to make for every classroom, it just doesn't account for the school as a whole. And to make a truly inclusive environment, we're going to need to apply this theory to every single classroom and hold all our students accountable to adhere to this. I think that last sentence really summarizes it well, because we can change as teachers. And I think as a younger generation comes in prep, we're more and more aware of this issue and how we need to be more culturally responsive, but we need to also make our students to be more culturally responsive and take that as a sign to change them as well, to be able to create that environment. And really, the environment is just one half of a whole. It's academics and the environment that you're in. You need to feel at home in the classroom. So that is my presentation. I really do appreciate you taking the time to watch it. I will be including my final reflection attached to this or at the end, so you can see that. So thanks again,